The purpose of the Absolute, who's a person, is to enjoy unlimitedly. I need one tick up, please. Thanks. It's to enjoy unlimitedly. That means there has to be interaction and love. And on a morning walk, Prabhupada, as he neared his vehicle that would take him back to the temple from the morning walk, noted that as the devotees walked and he talked with them and they exchanged thoughts, they had questions for Prabhupada and Prabhupada answered, and there was reciprocation as they walked. And you will notice in the recording that the mood of the walk becomes more and more animated and joyful. And at the end there's a loud roar of devotees saying Jai Prabhupada before he gets in his vehicle. And then Prabhupada pauses and he says, you see, this is Ananda. He said, if I was just to walk by myself, there would be no Ananda because there's no exchange. But this reciprocation that we have, this is the source of Ananda, or happiness, pleasure. And same is true for Krishna. He expands himself out of his own desire to share joy. When we are happy, when we're joyful, we don't keep it to ourselves. If you win something, you call all your friends. Say just won. Otherwise, what's the use? Just sit there and go, I won, I won, I won. So Krishna is unlimitedly happy because he's joy himself, but he shares it by expanding himself into unlimited parts and parcels and also expansions of himself so that there can be more nuance in the relationship. For instance, in the Panchatattva, we have Śrī Chaitanya Prabhu Nityānanda, Sri Advaita, Gadadhara, Srivas, and then Adi Gaur, which means, and everybody else too. It's all the devotees together and their reciprocations, which are in line with loving relationship with the Supreme, with Caitanya Mahāprabhu. I noticed that in my family, after my parents left the world, there was no more center to be held. They were gone, and the relatives then were a lot more relative, or they were a lot more distant, and they couldn't relate as much, because when I do something as a kid, I want to come home and tell my mom what I did. You know, here's what I if it's good. Otherwise. But after that, there was nobody to tell, really. After my mom was gone, my dad was gone, and it's like, who are you going to tell? It's like, just try to be self-contained and happy by yourself. But Krishna's sharing with everybody, and he holds the center. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Shishte. Even those guys are together. If you watch those two crows, they're going to end up, one's following the other. They're talking. They're going to end up in a branch hanging out somewhere, sharing a little, piece of garbage they found or something. Out here, it'll be nice. It'll be a bale fruit or something. So everybody is looking for that reciprocation and love. And the Lord is love personified. And he expands himself into many different forms in order to exchange this kind of love or rasa. And so his first expansion is Balaram. And the difference between Krishna and Balaram is that Balaram is white and Krishna is black. And also Krishna tends to wear yellow, except in ISKCON. And then Balaram tends to wear blue. And the other difference is that the mood of Balaram, as they say, the abhiman, is that I'm a servant of Krishna. And they're intimately connected. We know in the pastime of killing Aghasura, in the aftermath when Krishna had expanded himself into the calves and the cowherd boys, and they all came back into Vrindavan. They were there for a whole year after Aghasura was killed. No one could tell the difference. That is, no one means any of the parents didn't know that wasn't their real son, their real sons. And also the cows thought they were their calves, even though they were growing up. And they had more affection for them, meaning the boys and the calves, because they were direct expansions of Krishna. And Krishna is extremely attractive and lovable. And when he expanded into the identical forms of boys and calves, then there was this phenomena in Vrindavan where the parents were noticeably more attached to their children, and the cows were more attached, even the bulls, to their offspring. And during that pastime, Lord Balaram notices that something funny is going on in Vrindavan. And as is explained by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, that, by the way, is the train going back to Godhead. There's a station over there if anybody wants to wait. You can get on the train. Or we can go by boat. There is a boat down here. As many as we can fit, we can take that later. So Balaram wondered why everyone was acting so oddly in Vrindavan. And then Krishna, by degrees, revealed it to him until Balaram could understand. And then he appreciated what his brother was doing as the supreme mystic. And they have a very intimate relationship. You can get an inkling of that relationship by going to the Krishna Balaram temple in Vrindavan. And there's no more pleasing view, in my opinion, of Krishna and Balaram together, casually hanging out, wearing the best and most snazzy clothes you can imagine, all kinds of nice jewelry. And there they are, just enjoying together in their rasa as brothers. And this is an eternal fact. Krishna expands, of course, into many more forms after Balaram. And there are other Shaktis that Krishna has, and he interacts with all those Shaktis, and they're unlimited. We're one of those Shaktis. We are tiny expansions of Krishna, and we also have an unlimited and eternal opportunity to serve Krishna and to be in his pastimes, in his lila. And it's one of the reasons Bhaktivinoda Thakur states in his song Shuddha Bhakata Charana Renu that devotees become joyful as they go to the places where Caitanya Mahāprabhu performed his pastimes. And big on drama. And the plays were all pastimes of Krishna in Vrindavan, and also Lord Ramachandra, Lakshman, Sitaram, Lakshman, Hanuman. And during those plays, the townspeople would come and watch, because Nitāi would organize all of the children, and they would enact these plays of the Leela of Krishna and Lord Ramachandra, and they had all the details of these Leelas, and they would act them out, and Nitāi would organize everything and orchestrate it, tell everyone where to stand, what to say. They would use props, and it was a theater, a repertory theater, right there in Ekachakra Gram. One of the elders once asked Nitāi, how do you know all these things? How do you know all these pastimes? And he said, well, these are my pastimes. Krishna certainly knows his own pastimes. And Nitāi is Krishna, and the first expansion of Krishna. There's really no difference except in mood. But as I said, Krishna and Balaram are intimately connected in a relationship, and Balaram serves Krishna. So Nitāi was a young man, and there's a way in which at a certain point young people would spend some time in Gurukula, and that means they would go learn all the mantras, stay in an ashram, and sometimes when traveling mendicants, sannyasis would come into a village, they would ask if there's anybody who wants to put their son in training. And the sannyasi would then take the youth and go to holy places and train that person up in all the mantras and all the leelas of the Lord. So one time in Ekachakragram, a sannyasi came and stayed at the home of Hadai Pandit, who was extremely hospitable. And just before he left, Hadai offered him any charity that he could, that he might need. And he said, just one thing, that is, your son Nitāi. I need him. I'm going to go to all these holy places. I'll train him in all the mantras. And Hadai Pandit froze. One is reminded, in fact, Vrindavan Thakur, in recounting this story, is reminded of when in Ayodhya, Vishvamrita Muni came, who's a very fearsome sage. And all the residents of Ayodhya greeted him. Dasarath gave him all hospitality, and then said, I'm at your service. He was a king, and Vishvamrita's a sage, so the kings would offer whatever you want. And then Vishvamrita said, I need your son Ram. He was just a youth at the time, just barely finished military training in his youth, all the martial arts. And Dasarath similarly froze. How would you like it if somebody asked for a little donation like that? I mean, at our youth yatra, a lot of the parents were thinking, I don't know if we can let them go for 10 days. What to speak of for an indefinite amount of time. However, that was the culture at the time, and they felt that was the best thing to do. However, Dasarath had hesitated, invoking the ire of Vishvamrita, and then Vashishta, who is the guru of the family, said privately to Dasarath that, first of all, you don't know who your son is. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, so I wouldn't worry about him too much going out there, because Vishvamrita wanted him to go and battle with some Rakshasas who were ruining the yagyas, the sacrifices of the sages. And Vashishta also said that Vishvamrita will train him on all the mantras, they'll come back, everything will be fine. And Lakshman is inseparable from Ram, so they both went. So this is something that Vrindavan Thakur remembered in relationship to Nitāi being swept away by this sannyasi. And he left there and went on pilgrimage for 20 years. Ended up residing in Vrindavan. And when he was 32 years old, that's when Śrī Chaitanya Mahāprabhu had started his Sankirtan pastimes. And Of course, Nitāi had waited because he's a servant of Caitanya Mahāprabhu. He had waited to be empowered by Caitanya Mahāprabhu to himself start spreading the Sankirtan movement. So when he understood that Caitanya Mahāprabhu was starting his Sankirtan Leela, Nitāi came to Navadvīpa. Caitanya Mahāprabhu had had a dream where he saw that a chariot had come marked with a flag with the insignia of the palm tree, and there was a great personality riding on it who was asking, "Where is Nimai Pandit? Where is Nimai Pandit? Where is Nimai Pandit?" And after that dream, he told the devotees that a great personality is coming to Navadvīpa, and finally he told them one day, "He's arrived. You should go and find him." So the devotees went out, and for 9 hours they searched every house, every milk shed, but I think they skipped Nandana Acharya's house accidentally, because that's where Nimai was hiding. And Caitanya Mahāprabhu then said Nitāi was hiding. So that's when Caitanya Mahāprabhu took his associates and he said, "I'll take you to him." And he went straight to Nandana Acharya's house. And Nitāi was standing on the balcony, and they saw this beautiful form of Nitai's Rakta Gaura Kalevaram. He's golden with a little red. If you look at Panchatattva in Mayapur, when we go there in a few days, you'll notice that Nitāi is Rakta. He's reddish. He's golden reddish. And Caitanya Mahāprabhu and Nitāi were inseparable. They would gaze into each other's eyes, and tears would come from their eyes. They embraced one another. They fell to the ground in ecstasy. And Vrindavan Das Thakur points out they're the same personality beholding one another. And when it came time to perform the Vyasa Puja, because Balaram is the Adi Guru, Caitanya Mahāprabhu asked Srivas Pandit to perform all the rituals for Vyasa Puja. There is a elaborate set of rituals that are performed for the previous acharyas that we don't do so much. And Srivas gave a garland to Nitāi and said, "Put the garland on Srila Vyasadeva." And Nitāi just stood there. And he repeated himself, did Srivas, said, "Please put the garland on Vyasadeva for the ceremony." And Nitāi stood there in a kind of trance. He said, "Please put the garland on." And then Caitanya Mahāprabhu said, "Place the garland on Srila Vyasadeva." And then Nitāi placed it around Caitanya Mahaprabhu's neck. And so the Adi Guru is the Guru is one who reveals Krishna. This is Brahmāṇḍa bhramite kon bhāgyavān jīva guru-kṛṣṇa prasadi pāya bhakti-latā-bīja. This is an iconic verse from the Caitanya Charitāmrita which we can relate to. That is, we're wandering here in the material universe. Who can say they're not wandering? Because, somebody look up the word, please. What does it mean to wander? I'll try to prove my point with a good definition. We come into the world, we don't know where we came from, right? Like if somebody stopped you and said, "Where'd you come from?" And you say, "I don't know." "And where are you going?" You say, "I don't know that either." They say, "You're just wandering. Son, you're loitering, wandering." Yes? We'll need the microphone to start slow because we're going to get human interaction now instead of just a monologue. Do you like the setting here? We're not suffering, right? Happy.
So the wander comes from West German origin. It's related to wend or the wind.
Wend. Like you wend your way around, or the wind just blows this way, that? Is that the implication?
Not the wind blowing, but sorry, it's not wind, it's wind.
Windy?
Path.
It's a little windy. So we're on a windy road. And we're pulled from one place to the next and have no idea how that's taking place until you read the Bhagavad Gita. Yes? He has a better definition.
You said wandering with no aim. It's mentioned here, same thing.
No aim.
Walk or move in a leisurely or aimless way.
Aimless way. So, Brahmāṇḍa bhramite kon bhāgyavān jīva guru-kṛṣṇa-kṛpāya bhakti-latā-bīja means we're aimlessly moving from one body to the next, one universe to the next. And then by the grace of Krishna, one gets a guru, and by the grace of the guru, one gets Krishna. And so, Lord Nityānanda is the original guru. And he reveals the importance of Śrī Chaitanya Mahāprabhu to all the devotees and reveals that he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Caitanya Mahāprabhu took sannyāsa and he headed for this place, Jagannātha Puri. And this is a stop before you get to Puri. It's about 6 miles away. And of course they were walking. This is pretty far along from Navadvīpa when they stopped here. And you'll notice that as they stopped from the Caitanya Charitāmrita, you'll note that they stopped in various places, and what did they do? They engaged in Kṛṣṇa Kathā. In fact, Nitāi had heard from others the story of Śrī Gopinath. He told that story here, and the devotees just enjoyed, and everything was going fine until Śrī Chaitanya Mahāprabhu asked Nitāi to hold his danda. And you know, when you ask somebody to hold your bead bag and you'll be right back, and then you come back and like, where's my bead bag? Oh, I don't have it anymore. I never had that happen, but somebody actually cut off my shika when they were helping buzz me up. Since then, I learned how to do it myself. But they thought it was funny. I didn't think it was that funny. They were like, ha ha ha, it'll grow back. It's a big deal to a brahmachari. Okay, so Nitāi had broken his danda in 3 parts and threw it away, and apparently threw it in this river. So when Caitanya Mahāprabhu came back and he asked for his danda, Nitāi said, you know, you broke it because you were in ecstasy. I tried to save you from fainting, and we both fell on the danda, and it broke, and then now it's gone. He had different excuses for why the danda was gone. So now both Vrindavan Das Thakur and Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, and then our acharyas like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, mention the importance of this pastime. It's still enigmatic, even though they give different descriptions, because it's enigmatic in and of itself that the Supreme is one, but he expands himself into many. And that's why I brought up that verse, Vedanti tattva vidas tattvam yajñanamadvayam, in an attempt to build a foundational basis for this talk today. Because there's a way in which it's incomprehensible how the Supreme is everything, and he's one, Advaya, but at the same time he has variety. But it makes a lot of sense, to me anyway, because the Supreme is all cognizant, full of bliss, eternality, and ananda. And that's why I also mentioned that for there to be ananda, there has to be loving relationship. So how is this a significant and loving relationship between Caitanya Mahāprabhu and Lord Nityānanda? Why did he break the danda? And even more mysteriously, why did Caitanya Mahāprabhu dictate from within that Nitāi should break the danda, and even more interesting is a horrible word. I hate it. It's very milquetoast and neutral. Give me another word. Curious is okay, although it's not building that much. What? I already used it. Intriguing. I think curious. It's all right. It's even more curious why Caitanya Mahāprabhu then became angry. If he's the one, as Vrindavan Das Thakur says, who inspired Nitāi to break it in the first place, because Nitāi and Chaitanya are one person in two. I said before, they gaze into each other's eyes, they're looking at the same person. So there are some answers to that. And they're important, and also will make them as relevant as possible. So it's not just an esoteric exercise or philosophical or theoretical. There's an internal and external aspect to Caitanya Mahaprabhu's mood. The external mood is that he has to set an example for others. That is that if the leader doesn't follow something, or does follow something, then everyone else will go down the same path. This is something that comes up in the Srimad Bhagavatam 5th chapter of the first canto, when Narada Muni seeks help from, or when Vyasadeva seeks help from his guru, Srila Vyasadeva, when Narada Muni gives counsel to Srila Vyasadeva in his moment of confusion or moroseness, why he's feeling unhappy. And he tells him that what you wrote throughout the Vedas gives a lot of loopholes to people to follow, so that when you talk about ways that you can engage in sense gratification and then offer it to the Supreme, people just take the only part of the sentence they'll hear is sense gratification. Like grihe tako, bani tako, sadahari boli tako. Many people say, yeah, grihe tako, bani tako. It doesn't matter where you live. But they forgot the second part. Sadahari boli tako. That's the important part of it. You got to keep chanting. So I'll just finish this thought and then I'll see what you're... No. Okay, so he says, does Narada to Vyas, that if you give people an excuse for sense gratification, that's the main thing they'll hear. Prabhupada once had a 7-Up on a flight. You know, they come around with stuff and they say, you want one of these? He's like, what is it? He said, it's 7-Up. It's a rather innocuous drink. It's just bubbles and sugar and maybe a little lemon lime flavor. And so Prabhupada had a 7-Up. And he said it helped his digestion. He liked the flavor. Well, that made it around the world faster than the 4 regulative principles ever did. And this is what I'm about to say without the internet, which is interesting. And this is just a slight bit of hyperbole, but 3 days later there were 7-Up trucks pulling up to every temple. Again, it's hyperbole, but my point is that when there's a hint of, like, hey, let's try this, everyone's like, he did it, therefore I'll do it. Caitanya Mahāprabhu was aware of that, therefore he strictly followed the external rules and regulations for the benefit of others. And actually Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentions in his Pancha Samskar essay, which I think I enumerated a little bit the other day when we were at Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya's house, how there's these different levels. The initiation is a process more than an event. And in that process, there's this sense of turning away from the material world, identifying oneself as a devotee, and so forth. I forgot my point, why it was related to the Pancha Samskar. Do you remember, Pranahari? Yes. Yeah. Yes, thank you. So in his essay, he talks about how everybody needs this reformatory process, and everybody needs to get initiated to get purified. And I won't go into that very much detail, but he says, does Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that some people are already liberated when they're born. Very rare, but they're liberated souls. He said, but even they take initiation to set an example for others. So this was one of the moods of Śrī Chaitanya Mahāprabhu. He's in Acharya Leela. Yes, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but he comes to show by example how to attain success in life. And it is important to actually strictly follow the rules and regulations. And there's a but to that, which I'm going to bring up in a second very carefully. So externally he became angry because Nityananda's intention was to say that you don't need a danda. Why would you need a danda? You're beyond a paramahamsa. So in the sannyasa order, there's Bahudak, Kudichak, Parvajakacharya, and Paramahamsa. These are 4 levels of sannyas. Should I say what they are, how they enact those? I will, because they're kind of interesting. The first level, the man leaves home and he goes nearby, and the family cooks for him and brings it by. They just swing by and they drop it off. And then he gives that up and goes to find any grains left over in the field. He'll just gather them together, get a little water, make some khitri and a little fire, and he's good. Less dependence on any one person. And then Parvajakacharya means he doesn't stay or even know where the fields are that are going to provide him grains, because he's moving around from one place to another constantly and just depends on Krishna. And finally, Paramahamsa describes the highest level of realization. The person becomes so fully absorbed in Krishna, like Madhya Puri, doesn't ask anybody for anything, and just is absorbed in Krishna consciousness. Krishna personally takes care of such a person. So carrying the stick around for the danda indicates that you just took sannyas and you're at the lower level of sannyas. So Nityananda said, what is this nonsense? Not just Paramahamsa, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Why should he carry a danda? He didn't like it. He didn't like the look of it. He wanted everybody to know, as I indicated before, hey, this is Krishna, but he's playing a role. So there's this tension that's always there in the Leela, that he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but he's following these rules and acting like an ordinary person. Nityananda's bent is towards bringing out his godhood, so to speak, and showing everybody who he is and glorifying him in that way. So that's one of the reasons that he broke the danda. Or that is the reason that he broke the danda, according to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So why did Caitanya Mahāprabhu become angry? Well, he did that and does that in many of his pastimes here in Puri, when devotees, out of a sense of spontaneous love, they break the regulations that are set for devotees to follow because they love Caitanya Mahāprabhu. For instance, Kalidas. Kalidas had an interesting New Year's resolution, which was to take the remnants of every Vaishnava in Bengal. In fact, he had so much faith in Vaishnavas that he'd go here, there, and everywhere and beg for their remnants. Because as described in the Caitanya Charitāmrita, there's 3 very powerful substances. The remnants of the prasad of a devotee, the water that's washed their feet, and the dust that they've walked in. And so Kalidas had this goal, and Vaishnavas don't always hand over remnants, say, yeah, here you go. So he would, by trick, hook or by crook, he would take the remnants. So Jadu Thakur was a pure devotee He and his wife were pure devotees. They lived in a little house, and Kalidas came there, and he brought mangoes, boga. He said, I brought these for you to offer to your deity and eat, and I'd like to wait here while you do it, and I'm going to take the remnants. And they said, we couldn't do that. We're your servants. And Kalidas said, okay, very well. And he went outside and he hid in the bushes. Now, as recently as the 1970s, houses used to have a little pit right outside their house where they'd throw everything. But it was just leaf plates and clay cups. Leaf plates, leaf cups, and clay cups. Couldn't be more environmentally friendly if you tried. And they would just throw them in there. Cows would come over and lick whatever remnants were there, and then they'd eat the leaves. After the first rain, clay cups would disintegrate, go back into the soil, no problem, until plastics were invented. Now we have a problem because everyone thinks they're the same as clay cups, so you see garbage everywhere. Kalidas went out and he waited outside in the bushes nearby where this little pit was. And after Jadu Thakur offered the mangoes in his mind and then enjoyed the mangoes and then took the pits and he threw them into the ditch, then Kalidas came out and took the remnants. Yay, Kalidas. Later on in Jagannātha Puri, there was a standing rule that nobody should take the foot water of Caitanya Mahāprabhu. He was very strict about that. It was out in front of the temple, just as you notice at Gopinath's temple, there's a little spigot. Everyone who walks in, they wash their feet first. It's tradition. Most temples, even around in Japan, they have these beautiful little water area with a bamboo stick, and on it is a little cup. You're supposed to say Achman before you walk in. There's a sense of doing some purification ritual before you walk in any temple. So washing the feet, especially people are walking around barefoot, they wash their feet before they walk in to see the Lord. And Kalidas came and he put out his hand when the water was coming from Caitanya Mahaprabhu's lotus feet, and Kalidas drank it once, twice, and then Mahaprabhu turned around and said, that's enough. Kaviraj Goswami says, Mahaprabhu knew what he was doing, knew that Kalidas was doing that, and there was a rule against it, but he had so much appreciation for Kalidas's faith in Vaishnavas and his way of honoring them, taking their remnants, that he allowed him that mercy, but only that much. And then externally he showed a little gruffness towards him. But internally, and you'll find again, there's always this dichotomy, internally he was very satisfied with Kalidas. So in a similar way, Caitanya Mahaprabhu was very satisfied with Nityananda Prabhu's breaking his danda, but externally he showed anger. And he also used that as a pretext to break away from those who were traveling with him. And he said, you're all causing me so much trouble. Just see how Nityananda, I gave him my danda to protect my only possession in the world, and he broke it into 3 pieces. The 3 pieces also indicate that he liked Nityananda Prabhu, the Tridandi idea, because Mahaprabhu had taken Ekadanda sannyas from the Shankara Sampradaya. It's a humorous pastime because there's this seemingly whimsical way in which Nityananda Prabhu conducts himself. Even when he comes into the association of the devotees in Navadvīpa, Advaitacharya, who's more strict on rules and regulations, notices that this person has showed up. Of course, he knew who he was, but externally he also thought, like, who is this guy? And you'll find in the dialogue when they come to Advaitacharya's house, he's saying, who let this guy in here? We don't even know where he comes from. Because Nitāi was an avaduta, Avadhuta means he's oblivious to the outside world because he's so internally absorbed. So Advaitacharya and he would have these mock fights all the time, where Advaitacharya would say, Who are you? Nobody knows what caste you're from or where you came from and so forth. So that's the position of Nityananda, or his mood, juxtaposed with others in the Leela who are following regulations more strictly. And so that's the tension that takes place. It's that prevails in the various pastimes that Caitanya Mahāprabhu has, not only in Navadvīpa but also here in Jagannātha Puri. And this is the pinnacle of them. Nityananda breaking his danda, throwing it away. And then, of course, Mahaprabhu moved on by himself to Jagannātha Puri. Just like, you might get tired of who you're traveling with and say, that's it, I'm going by myself from now on. So let's see if you have any reflections or questions. Yes, Nanda.
A comment and a question. In regard to wandering, in Alice in Wonderland, the story of Alice in Wonderland, which is a cultural thing, when I think it's Alice is wandering and she asks the Cheshire cat which path should she take, because she comes to a diversion, and he says, where do you want to go? And she says, I don't know. And he says, then any path will take you there. And then I also find it perplexing in this story why, and if you have some comments, why Nityananda answered the way he did, because that's also yad archara chistresas, and he didn't answer, apparently he didn't answer honestly, apparently he's fabricated an answer. Are there any comments on that or any explanation on that?
No. I mean, nothing from the commentary except for the fact that it's Nityananda. Nityananda Prabhu does that a lot. And in various circumstances, he's contradictory in his behavior. Sometimes this is described in the Bhagavatam in the verse which says, Evam vratasva priyanama kirtya jatanarago jitachuta acher hasatyato rotiti roti gayati unmadavan rititi lokabhayaha. That a person whose heart has melted in love of God becomes indifferent to the external world and sometimes may act erratically. And Nityananda Prabhu is the epitome of that. He acts erratically. And so there are other pastimes in the Chaitanya Bhagavat and the Caitanya Charitāmrita when Nityananda Prabhu responds to Caitanya Mahāprabhu in incoherent ways. Like Mahaprabhu will ask him something and Nityananda he'll ask him for some information. He'll say something like, I will eat. And there's no connection to what he just said. So that's his kind of, that's his nature in the Leela. Yes, Prabhu? Oh. Is everyone okay? All right.
When we say the pranam mantra, when we say the prema dhvani, we say Paramahamsa Parivajikacharya. Why exactly is that?
Because in our line we have Paramahamsas who are Pravrajakacharyas. One of the ways in which our Guru Varga emphasizes preaching as Rag Marg, actually. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in his logo for the Gaudiya Math put an image of a printing press, and above it he said Rag Marg. And there's such an emphasis on this idea of the sadhana being distribution, the overflowing of distribution of Krishna consciousness, that those distinctions are merged together also. It's not just a clinical idea that at this point, you should just retire. Although Prabhupada said many times, he said, I just want to retire and write books and you all take over the management. That never happened. And he also told devotees, he said, if you go out and preach for, and I forget how many years he said, then I bless you, you can go sit down in the dham and just chant. But most devotees I know don't do that because Prabhupada didn't do it. He sort of set an example as a Paramahamsa and a Parvritakacharya to go on teaching Krishna consciousness despite the fact that it's sometimes, well, it's never inconvenient. Well, maybe it is for a Paramahamsa who would rather sit down. You had a point? Oh, somebody over here in this region had their hand up, I think. Manjulikanta. Okay. Did you like going to the filthiest place on earth? That bus stand? What I noticed was that with the Harinam, Nirkula saw it and she goes, please don't take your shoes off here. I couldn't believe it. But, I noticed how beneath all the grime, there's so many pious souls out there. And then when the Harinam cut through, again, the holy name saves the day. And the whole place became sanctified. And I was thinking, what a contrast. You can't epitomize the word filth any better than just presenting that place. And then you have the holy name, which is completely transcendental and juxtaposed. It was really a stark difference. And the whole place felt pure after that. Please go ahead.
Guru Maharaj, my question is related to the Gambhira that you had taken us before. We were wondering, when we went there, the Pujari there was explaining to us that what we see is not the Gambhira. The Gambhira is actually deep, so it's about 1.5 floors down. It's a closed space where no light enters. And that's why the Ananta Jyoti is always there. The lamp used to be in that space and used to be lit permanently for him. I was wondering, why is it that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would choose to stay in such a dark place? Is there a reason?
Well, a lot of our acharyas have done that. They call them gufas. Gufa means cave only. And there are several caves. And one of them's over by Radha Shyama-Sundar. When they're excavating to expand that temple. It's funny how this happens a lot. Chaitanya Mahāprabhu found Tota Gopinath when he was just digging around kind of out of ecstasy and his hand just hit a crown. And then you find Adhoksaja Vishnu over at the yoga pit. He was in the ground too. I mentioned that before. And then they found this underground cave over by Radha Shyama-Sundar when they were expanding. And there are other caves too that devotees have gone into. So you got to go into one to appreciate it. Because we don't know how distracted we are. We just don't know. We're used to it. I'm used to it. That there's so many sounds, there's so many things going on all the time externally in the world that it's almost, especially now, as mentioned in the Bhagavatam, and above all, always disturbed. This was 5,000 years ago when the Bhagavatam was spoken at Naimasharanya. They said, Manda Sumanda Matayo Manda. It says in the verse, Prayanal Payushasavya Kalavas Minjugajana Manda Sumanda Matayo Manda Bhagya. In the age of Kali Yuga, most people will be very slow for spiritual realization. And Manda Sumanda Matayo means they'll have really bad ideas. And that's a bad idea. And there'll be lots of them. So then it says, and above all, they'll be always disturbed. So it's a very disturbing environment. So when one gets this hankering to, I really want to fully concentrate on Krishna. And then you start doing it, it's like, knock, 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 knock. Hey, you want to see the whatever it is? And like, no, I'm trying to concentrate here. So some sadhus, they go into these caves. So I went into the cave in Shamasundar. There's no radio. You can't get internet down there, I guarantee you. There's no connection at all. It's like sometimes you get in your room and they're like, maybe I can get this to work, come on, over here, over here. But down there, forget about it. There's no sound. It's all muffled. All you can hear is internal. And it's very organic under the earth. So they're these ideas like the prachetas, they went underwater and stayed down there. Sadhus, when they decide they're retiring from the world, they really go for it. They'll find a place underwater or in a cave or something like that. So that's the idea of these gufas. And to the outside mind, it's like, you're going to miss the World Series. What about the World Cup? They don't care anymore. They don't have a team jersey or anything like that. They just want to be fully absorbed. So that's the idea of Gambhīra. There's no distraction whatsoever. You don't even need a do not disturb sign. Nobody can even find you down there. Yes. 1, 2.
They have one of these caves in Pandharpur. There's an ancient saint from Maharashtra. She had her bhajan there, and I went in. We were there during the winter time, and when I went into it, I was thinking, it's very warm here. And so the brahmacharis were telling me that the nature of these is that they stay warm in the winter and cool during the summer.
It's the same with well water too. When you bathe from a well, it's uncanny because in the winter, cold winter, like in Vrindavan, my friend has a little farm, and there's a pump that was pumping out water, and you could just go take a bath in it. It's like getting under Niagara Falls, actually. And in the wintertime, you're freezing out there, and then you get hit by that water. It's like, wow, that's nice. And in the summer, it's cool. So that was one of Prabhupada's points about be closer to nature, because you'll see that Krishna has a plan. Everything's planned out nicely. You don't have to have air conditioning and heating if you design your homes and the way you live properly. You had a point. Please pass the mic back.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, as I was listening to this beautiful class and remembering some points that while Mahaprabhu was chastising the devotees and saying, now nobody will follow me, no one should come with me because of he did this and he did that. Actually, he was glorifying them while he was chastising. They had such intimate, extraordinary love that in this Mahaprabhu's pastime that it has not been, demonstrated in other incarnations. So the love between the Supreme Lord and his pure devotees, that while he's also chastising, he's glorifying how much they love and care for him, that sanyāsa is not a big deal for them. And on the other hand, yes, he wants to set an example, but that one thing, and I was also reflecting something that happened this morning. Is Shraddha Devi here, Mataji? So she was out of love. She was, chastising a devotee, and then she told me, don't worry, he's like my son. He stayed with me for so many years. And I was thinking, yeah, sure, because there's love, therefore there is so much intimacy, therefore she can correct someone. Someone who does seva, he will be chastised. She will not chastise me because I didn't do anything, Of course, when she chastised someone, I could only see how glorious he is, and he has done so much seva that there was intimacy, and therefore there's love, and therefore there's some correction there. And I was also remembering that point where you said the other day that about writing, that you cannot edit a blank page, but you can edit a bad writing. So, if there's some service, then there's chastisement and there's mercy flowing. And everybody, all of us could know the glories of these devotees through this pastime of apparently Mahaprabhu being angry.
Thank you for bringing out that nuanced point. It's really important that this supposed anger that Caitanya Mahaprabhu had towards the devotees and the way they interact throughout their pastimes is a sign of the most intimate kind of love. And there's ways in which devotees sometimes complain, just as you sort of indirectly complained. Why didn't I get chastised like that? And Advaitacharya, when Kamalakanta Vishwas, who's his secretary, had written a letter trying to straighten out a debt that Advaitacharya supposedly had, and then Caitanya Mahāprabhu somehow or other got a hold of that letter, and then he chastised Kamalakanta Vishwas for intimating that Advaitacharya would have a debt. And then Advaitacharya found out that Mahaprabhu had banned Kamalakanta from coming near. That was a kind of chastisement. And then he complained to Mahaprabhu. He said, why do you show so much deference to Kamalakanta Vishwas by banning him from coming here, whereas you never chastised me like that? Which is one of the reasons that he orchestrated the pastime where he had Caitanya Mahāprabhu actually pull him off the Vyasasan and beat him to show that he was worthy of being chastised. There's so much more to say about that. Vaikuntanayaka Prabhu.
Maharaj, what I saw here was that how Nityānanda Prabhu could understand the deeper intention of Mahaprabhu. He didn't just take the literal words, right? And I believe there's such a pastime that took place between Srila Prabhupada and Tamal Krishna Maharaj as well, where Srila Prabhupada was telling Maharaj to go to China, and Maharaj was saying, no, I need here, okay, and then he shows him the bus party members, and Prabhupada is very pleased and things like that, right? And Prabhupada says, okay, you continue here, something in those lines. So my question was like, the deeper meaning, I mean, going beyond what the Guru's literal words mean, it's a very thin line, right? It's not something to actually, for new disciples to even try to interpret, right? It's something where they have a very deep connection with their Guru. Only such disciples can afford to do that, right? Is that correct or what?
Well, in Guru Tattva, Guru is a position and is also a person. So it's like the United States Postal Service. They wear a uniform. They'll come and deliver your mail. They're federal employees. If you interfere with their work, it's a federal crime, actually. And it could be just the person who lives next door to you, who just happens to put on the uniform. So there is a way in which the position is vitally important. We see how the Bhagavatam emphasizes that relationship is empowering. In the case of Indra, when he was sitting on his throne, Indra likes to be surrounded by eulogizers, and they were appreciating him a lot. And then when his guru, Brihaspati, walked into the assembly, there was this mood of Indra kind of noticed he came in, but then really didn't do anything about it. And then his guru noticed it right away and just turned around and left and disappeared. And after that, everything fell apart for Indra. And the Bhagavatam emphasizes how important it is to have that sense that here's a representative. If the representative from the Apple Corporation comes to your temple and then you don't greet him properly at the door and so forth, and don't give him any sweet rice, he'll go back to the company and say, like, they mistreated me or something like that. And if you do that, you're showing disrespect to the company itself. So there's that sense. And then there's a personal relationship. And that's sometimes described, the balance, it's not a thin line. That's not the metaphor that's given, but a fire is given. So fire is very useful, but don't get too close. Otherwise you get burned, and don't get too far away either. Otherwise you don't get the benefit of the heat and the power of the fire. There's a sense of balance in that. And it's not stereotyped either, because everyone's different. And that kind of goes to the whole point of this juxtaposition of following rules and regulations and also having a sense of humanity. When I was with Satchidananda Maharaj recently, and we were spent the day together driving somewhere, and he was saying, I want to discuss the humanity of devotees, the realness of devotees and their personhood, not just their role as devotees or the rules that they follow and so forth, but actually who they are as people. I find that sometimes there's this sense of course, we know the term niyamagraha. There's a way of following rules and regulations, but then forgetting the purpose behind them, or then discarding the rules and regulations and just whimsically acting. Both those are off the road. So there has to be a balance between the two, that in the case you brought up of a relationship, the relationship has to be heartfelt. There's something Viraragava Acharya brings up when he talks about, no, I was just kidding. It's like, no, this is Krishna's arrangement. You're going to China. And so he did go to China. He didn't stay there permanently, but that's, if you go see in Dallas where many of the devotees, many pictures, or if you go to China or Hong Kong or Taiwan, you'll see the big preaching in China started because of that. And that was a kind of loving exchange that other devotees would not be able to absorb. There was a special relationship Prabhupada had with him and with other devotees too, that had a particular type of personality. Some Prabhupada chastised, and others, as Shrutikirti Prabhu once said, he said, Prabhupada never chastised me. He knew I couldn't take it. So there are real loving personal exchanges between not just guru and disciple, but also between Krishna and his devotees. And you'll notice that, what it always touches me is how Caitanya Mahāprabhu, he's nervous around certain of his followers. It's like, no, I'm not going to talk to him about it. I'll wait till another time. And that's relatable, because it's not all some stereotype, just you be like this, I'll be like that. We're eternally personalities, and we're united in love and also in appreciation when we see that somebody's representing, and we put our devotion there, because that's actually the way to channel it back to Krishna. So it's a balance, and that's what's in the pastime itself, that balance between the two. Or at least it indicates the fact that there's two worlds that we're walking in, and we have to be careful. Kṛṣṇa Prabhu, were you going to make a point? There's a whole other group going back to Godhead.
Jai Haribol.
boat's still available too.
I just wanted to thank you for explaining, because years ago I read in Caitanya Charitāmrita the story of the breaking of the Danda, and Srila Prabhupada says there that nobody knew why until Bhaktisiddhanta revealed the real reason. But then he doesn't explain it, he doesn't give the reason. So it's left me to scratch my head and think, well, what did Bhaktisiddhanta explain? And I'm glad to hear it from you today.
Thank you, Kṛṣṇa Prabhu. Now I feel happy. So, yes, Prabhu?
Hare Krishna. So, what we observe usually, Gaura and Nitāi, or Ram, Lakshman, or Krishna Balram, well, Ram, Lakshman, Krishna Balram, they usually come as eternal brothers. But in Gaura Nitāi, that's not the case, right? Is there any story or pastime behind that?
They're referred to as brothers.
Okay.
Yeah, but interesting nuances in the relationships that Krishna has with his expansions also, because in the pastime of Ram and Lakshman, Lakshman was the younger brother, and he was really miffed with the whole Leela, actually. You know, the way that he was totally subservient to his older brother. And then, you know, when Ram did his kingly dharma, put dharma over his dharma for his wife, and he dropped her off at the hermitage of Valmiki, he was not happy. And that mentioned the Caitanya Charitāmrita. After that, he vowed to only come as an older brother. That's why in Krishna Leela, he's known as Dauji, or the older brother. So that's there. I mean, there's these particular like little twists and turns in the Leelas that he presents, that he'll come in a certain way. But Caitanya Mahāprabhu and Lord Nityānanda, although they're not presented as, you know, coming from the same family or something like that, they're always referred to as brothers, in the sense that they're eternally Krishna Balaram. Actually, there's an interesting pastime that you'll like that indicated the parallel between Krishna Balaram and Nitāi and Gaura. And that is that Mother Sachi, who had Krishna Balaram deities and was worshipping them, one night had a dream. And she dreamed that Nitāi and Gaura had come, and they came in small size, and they came onto her altar where Krishna and Balaram were, and she had just made an offering of many types of sweets. And Nitāi and Gaura then started taking the sweets from Krishna and Balaram. And Krishna and Balaram, especially Balaram, stepped up and said, "What are you doing? These are meant for us." And Nitāi said, "No, not anymore. This is Kali Yuga. These are ours. All this is ours now." And Balaram said, "There's going to be a beating here." And back and forth they were arguing, Nitāi Gaura and Krishna Balaram, almost coming to fisticuffs. And so then she woke up and she told the story to her son. She said, "I had this really interesting dream." And he said, "This is a very nice dream, mother, but don't tell anybody about it." But it was indicative of this relationship of Krishna Balaram and Nitāi and Gaura. In the Leela, they're eternally brothers, related in that way. Yes?
Maharaj, I had a question, not exactly related to this topic, but sometimes we read in to our children some pastime, and my daughter always asks, how does it make sense that at night when they did kirtan, when the Pancha Tattva did kirtan, they chanted to the all night of Brahma, and how does next day come when a whole, and I had no answer for her. Even same thing with Ras Leela, and How do we understand this?
Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that he's time. It's one of the most, boy, I can't use enigmatic anymore, can I? It's beaten to death. Give me another word. Mysterious incarnations of the Lord as time. Bhagavatam mentions this. You don't see it. You don't see time. It just sneaks up on you at every second. It's like, you mean it's over? And then there's like, how did I get old? And followed by so many other ways in which time destroys everything. It just moves along. And that's Krishna's all-pervading power. I was watching the sun come up in Mayapur the other day, and I just had this feeling like Krishna's there in time. We read the verse, Ayuharti Vaipumsam, and the whole big wheel of the universe is just moving by his power. And he has his all-benevolent purpose. If I'm at odds with that, then I feel like I'm getting ground up. As Prahlad says in his prayers, Nishpijamanam upakasha vibho prapanam. Feels like this universe, if I get caught in it, in material consciousness, I'll be ground like in a grinding wheel or something like that. So because Krishna's time, he can expand the time or he can shrink it according to his will, just like he can do any other pastime. In Vrindavan, there's the time-space continuum idea, and in Vrindavan, there's a way in which it's a lotus, as mentioned in the Brahma Samhita, Shweta-dvīpa, and then it can close up. And so walking from one place to another, which seems like, how could they do that? They could do it. And in space, how could Ugrasena have 4 quadrillion bodyguards? Or for that matter, how could there be an arbuda of calves that Krishna had, which means that's a lot more than like 20 or 50. It's like unlimited calves, because he's the one who expands the space, and he's unlimitedly dimensional. Ekopyastora charitam jagaranda kotim yachaktirasti jagananda chayayaransta. His potency is there within every atom, and he's also the time energy, so he can expand or contract space and also time. And you had to be there to appreciate it. So we'll sing a song.